Hello and welcome back. This week we're going to review all things related to nutrition practices and behaviors at various stages of life, with the focus on infancy, childhood, pregnancy, and aging. This lecture is going to focus on early life cycle nutrition, and for this lecture our primary focus will be on how to properly feed infants, part 1. And then on the next set of slides, we'll look at what we can do with children and adolescents to promote lifelong positive lifestyle and dietary practices. And it's important to recognize that eating practices and behavior at early stages of life and how parents approach nutrition and eating with infants, children, and adolescents is going to have significant physical as well as psychological long-term effects on that child. So we'll talk about what parents can do to help ensure that their children have the most optimal chance of developing long-term positive health and dietary practices. We'll start off by reviewing some very general infant nutrition guidelines and then move on throughout this chapter into a little bit more complex information. In terms of total calorie needs, it should be pretty obvious that adults are going to require more calories than will infants. However, the amount of calories per our body weight and the amount of protein per our body weight is going to be a lot higher for infants than at any other point of our lives. So again, total calorie intake, total protein intake is going to be low, but if we as adults, if we had to eat the same amount per our kilogram of body weight that infants have to eat, we would be eating a lot more food than we currently are. Probably about 3 times as much food as we are now in order to meet our nutritional demands because infants are growing at a very rapid rate. Again, the reason for this is that when we're youngest, we're growing at the most rapid rate. So the amount of calories that we need for our weight is going to be the highest in infancy and gradually decrease as we get older. On the right side of this screen, you have the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for carbohydrates, fats, and proteins for adults. On the left side, what you can see is the macronutrient distribution that is for breast milk. And breast milk is designed to meet the nutritional needs almost to a T of infants. And so what you'll see from this is that the amount of fat, especially the amount of fat and the amount of protein, are drastically different. Fat needs for babies are very high, and the amount of protein needs, at least total as they make up the total calories, is very low. Now what's interesting about that is protein needs for babies are quite high per kilogram of body weight, but in terms of the total calorie breakdown, they're not quite as important, not nearly as important as is fat. The main reason for this is that fat plays roles very essential in growth and development. And our brain is primarily composed of fat. The development of nervous system primarily relies on fat. If a baby or a child, if they fall and get hurt, which they very frequently do, they need adequate fat tissue in order to heal that wound. And it's also important for fat-soluble vitamin absorption. And vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin E, those are vitamins that play very significant roles in development. So vitamin D, we've talked about that, and the role of that is going to be calcium metabolism. So it's going to promote the strengthening of bones and the development of bones. Very important in infants and children. If they do not have adequate amounts of vitamin D, then their bones of their legs are more likely to be bow-legged. and kind of curve out. Vitamin A helps with skin health, helps with vision. Vitamin E plays another big role with vision. So fat-soluble vitamins are very important for growth and development, which obviously is very crucial for babies. A very hot topic, very controversial topic for feeding infants is centered around whether or not infants should be breastfed or receive formula. And there's some good arguments for both. I'm going to try to be as neutral as possible as I'm explaining this, but I am going to outline the pros and cons that have been reviewed scientifically for each of these. Let's start out by reviewing breast milk. First and foremost, it's very high in fat and essential fatty acids. The total composition of calories that it's going to provide, that's going to make up about 54% of the total calories provided in breast milk. And that high fat content is very, very important because there's a lot of development that's going on, and it almost perfectly meets the macronutrient distribution that is required for infants. We talked a little bit about this a couple slides ago. The amount of protein is low compared to carbohydrates and fat, very low as a percentage. However, the amount of protein per kilogram of body weight is quite high. Most people, unless they're athletes or they have a condition like cancer or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or another metabolic wasting disease, they're not going to require this level of protein. Most adults are going to require somewhere between 0.8 and 1.0 grams per kilogram. So 1.5 grams per kilogram protein is relatively high. It just makes up a very small percentage. And the carbohydrates, interestingly enough, they're going to come from the sugar lactose, which is the same sugar that we get in cow's milk. When comparing the nutritional breakdown of breast milk versus formula, what we're going to see is that both of these are going to have nutrients, and they're going to have a good breakdown of them. We're going to get the amount of vitamins and minerals that we need from both of these products. We're going to get a good breakdown and proportion of the macronutrients. However, a big difference between the two and a big benefit of breast milk is that breast milk is going to provide a lot of positive living things that promote health. And these are things like antibodies that prevent against disease, hormones that are related to mood control, chemicals that prevent against viruses, allergens, parasites, promote growth in different ways. And there's also enzymes that are in milk. So enzymes are the things that help to break down nutrients and cause chemical reactions. There's actually thousands and thousands of ingredients in breast milk, and researchers are still learning about what ingredients and what chemicals are all in there. So breast milk is nutrients, plus it's also alive, and then it's also going to change over time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we keep going through this. But breast milk adjusts and changes over time. This slide has a list of some of the benefits of breast milk over formula. It's got the perfect nutrition profile, plus a lot of those living ingredients. There's a reduced risk of obesity for children and adolescents and adults that are breastfed as infants. There's enhanced immunity while somebody is breastfeeding, and what's really cool about that is the type of immunity boosting properties and chemicals that are released through breast milk are going to change over time to meet the most appropriate needs of the infant. There's a decreased risk of chronic disease in adulthood, linked to an increased IQ. Breast milk, because of that contact that you get with the baby, it's more likely to provide more emotional support. However, you can still get that with formula as long as there's a lot of skin-to-skin contact, but that's really that skin-to-skin contact that provides that emotional support. There's a reduced risk for allergies, and that's largely due to the immunity properties that are released through the initial breast milk that's released shortly after birth, known as colostrum. There's also a strong link between a decreased risk for postpartum depression of the mother with providing breast milk for the infant. And then because breast milk causes a greater expenditure of calories and protein, providing a baby with breast milk is more likely to lead to optimal weight management for the mother. Breast milk changes over time, so breast milk a couple days after a baby's born is not going to be the same a few months down the road. And that is because breast milk is going to change to meet the specific needs of the baby. So at first, during the first few days after birth, breast milk is going to come in the form of what's known as colostrum. This is yellow, it's very thin, and it's more watery. It's a bit higher in protein, and protein is a very big component of antibodies. So these antibodies are designed to help the baby fight off infection when the baby does not quite have that developed inside of it to be able to do that. So the mother is giving this to the baby through breast milk. It also promotes regular bowel movements because colostrum serves as a laxative. Then in the next approximately 10 to 14 days, milk is going to go through a transitional period. It's known as transitional milk, where it's becoming more and more like the mature milk that a more mature baby is going to need for the majority of infancy. And so the types of enzymes and the types of antibodies that are released, it's going to be altered. There's going to be a lot more calories and a lot more fat. A very high proportion of this will be from fat. And there's going to be a greater quantity of milk as well in order to meet the higher calorie, protein, carbohydrate, fat needs of baby. So breast milk is going to change over time to meet the needs of baby. As a dietitian, and especially as a male dietitian, it's really easy to look just at the nutritional benefits of something like breastfeeding and be all about that. But there's a lot of things that are at play for feeding infants, and there are lots of times when formula is actually a better option for parents than is breastfeeding. Something that's really nice about formula feeding is that mothers do not have to have very tight dietary or lifestyle restrictions required. If breastfeeding, smoking, and alcohol intake, those need to be minimized if not restricted completely. Also, breastfeeding is very, very demanding on mothers. It requires them to be up at all sorts of hours, available for their babies very frequently. Providing babies with formula allows either the father or other caregivers, other family members, friends, whoever might be a part of that support system to play a role in the feeding as well. So it's not just all on one person. With formula, it's very easy to keep track of the amounts of food that a baby's getting. And then formula is also digested more slowly. So breast milk is digested very quickly, which causes an infant to have to feed very often. With formula, because it breaks down more slowly, a baby can go longer periods of time without having to feed, which takes a little bit of pressure and responsibility off of the parent. And it's worth noting that formula is still very nutritious. It has a very good macronutrient profile, has lots of vitamins and minerals that are added to it. There's a lot of positives about it. It's still pretty darn good. So lots of reasons why formula can still be something that should be the route for parents in certain situations. In part 3 of this lesson, we'll talk about introducing solids and also a few more liquids. Introducing actual foods. This is a big one. We're not going to go into too much detail about this, but we will talk about what you can look for to determine whether or not a baby can start to have actual foods as opposed to breast milk or formula. So a good thing to look for, first of all, is the timeline. So somewhere between 4 and 6 months is usually when you can start to provide a baby with solid foods. So they're also going to double their birth weight around this time, so look for that. Signs from their end, things that they actually show. Look for them to have an interest in food. That could be keeping an eye on food, watching food, reaching for food, just showing an interest in food indicates they might be ready. More importantly are the next two things. The absence of the tongue thrust. So what will happen with that is when a baby gets food, before they're ready for it, they're going to push their tongue out. It's going to be a reflex. They don't want that food in there. They're really not ready for it. So when that tongue thrust goes away, when they're given food, you can start providing solids. Also, very, very important to prevent choking, they should be able to hold their head up straight. And that means that their head shouldn't be bobbling from side to side. It should be pretty sturdy, pretty strong, pretty straight. And generally these are going to occur right around the same time. So 4 to 6 months, and when baby doubles birth weight, that's when you should really start paying attention to those types of things to make sure that they're ready for solids. So baby's ready for foods. What foods can they get? Well, these foods, the most important thing is the texture. They should be soft and easy to digest, so they could be mashed, pureed, in almost a liquid form, kind of the form that you would get for baby food. If it is raw, or when you buy it, it should be cooked. Pretty much any baby food, regardless of the type of food that it is, can be provided. So babies can have meats at first, as long as they're the right consistency. Could be vegetables, could be fruits. The order of it really isn't important as long as the food is mashed, pureed, cooked. They probably shouldn't be getting dairy. That's a very common allergen, and they definitely cannot digest milk at that stage. But they should be getting one new food per week. So give them bananas 1 week, wait until the following week to introduce something like chicken. And that way you can get an idea of whether or not they're going to have an allergic reaction to it. Because a lot of times the allergic reactions that a baby or child will get will be relatively mild. So you might not catch it the first time they get it, but the second or third time you'll be able to see it. So provide one new food per week. When babies eat, provide no more than 4 ounces per meal. That's about the amount that you'll get in a container of baby food, and that's because the stomachs of babies are really, really small, very tiny. Around 4 to 6 months, you can start to get a little bit more interesting with liquids. So baby can start to have a sippy cup to promote coordination, so that they're actually picking up the thing that they're drinking, putting it into their mouth, practicing hand-eye coordination. They can also get small amounts of water, but should be limited to about 2 ounces per day. And they should still avoid cow's milk, and they definitely should avoid juice, even if the juice is 100% fruit juice. With a sippy cup or even a bottle, at any point they should never go to bed with that, because that's strongly linked to dental caries and cavities. When they are able to have cow's milk at 1 year of age, they can have whole milk. They should not have reduced fat milk though until the age of 2, because the fat needs between 1 and 2 are still very, very high.